the fire should have died. By every law of nature, it should have gone out hours ago. Outside, the wind screams across a frozen plain. The temperature has fallen to 40 degrees below zero. Snow moves sideways through the dark, swallowing the world. And yet, inside a single cone of poles and hide, a small flame still burns. A family sleeps around it. Children breathe slowly. No one shivers. No one wakes. No. By everything we think we know, these people should be freezing to death. Instead, they are warm. So here is the question that will follow us for the next 20 minutes. How does this tiny fire survive the longest, coldest night on Earth? And how did entire nations sleep peacefully through winters that would kill an unprepared person in hours? For more than 10,000 years, long before a single furnace or heater existed, people thrived here. Not by fighting the cold, but by understanding it better than we do today. This is not a story about struggle. It is a story about genius. And by the end, you will see a system so clever that modern engineers are studying it all over again. Stay until the end, because the answer to that small, impossible fire will change the way you see survival itself. Let us begin with a mistake almost everyone makes. When we think about surviving the cold, we think about making heat, more fire, more fuel, bigger flames. But the indigenous peoples of North America understood something deeper. The true secret was never about making heat. It was about keeping it. And to keep heat, they relied on one quiet, invisible material: air. Still, trapped, motionless air. This is the key principle of insulation, and they understood it long before it had a name. Moving air steals warmth, but trapped air holds it. The genius was in finding natural materials that could lock millions of tiny pockets of air in place. One of the most remarkable was cattail fluff. Gathered along rivers and lakes, this silky down is astonishingly light, and its insulating power rivals many materials we manufacture today. It was packed into winter shoes and clothing, creating protection that weighed almost nothing, yet held warmth like a shield. Then there was dry grass and moss, stuffed between layers of clothing and into the walls of homes. Each hollow stem became a tiny chamber of trapped air, blocking the cold from passing through. And animal skins were used with surprising sophistication. It was not only the fur that mattered. The hide itself, properly treated, became a windproof barrier. Smooth leather on the outside to stop the wind. Soft fur on the inside to hold the warmth. The perfect combination. This was technology written into the landscape. No factories, no machines. Just observation, patience, and a deep understanding of the world. But the most famous home of all hid the cleverest trick of them all, and almost everyone gets it wrong. At first glance, the tepee looks simple. A few poles, a cover of hide, a shelter that seems far too fragile to stand against a blizzard. But this elegant cone is an engineering marvel, refined over centuries of careful observation. Its shape is the first secret. The cone is almost perfectly aerodynamic. When hurricane winds roar across the open plains, they do not slam into the tepee, they flow around it. And because the cone leans slightly backward, the wind actually presses the whole structure down, locking it firmly to the ground. Beneath the cover stands a frame of 15 to 20 long, straight pine poles. Raising them was an art. 3 or 4 main poles were tied together first, and the rest were placed in a precise order, creating a structure strong enough to hold heavy snow. The outer cover was sewn from bison hides. A single cover could weigh more than 100 kilograms and use up to 20 hides. Properly tanned, it became almost completely waterproof and completely windproof. But the true secret of its warmth was hidden inside. A second layer, a lining of thinner hides, was attached to the inside of the poles. And here is the clever part. This lining stopped about half a meter above the ground, leaving a gap between the two walls. This gap worked exactly like a modern thermos. Cold air slipping under the outer cover did not rush in as an icy draft. Instead, it rose silently upward through the gap between the two layers, where it mixed with the warm air of the fire and was carried out through the smoke hole above. The fire itself was not in the center. It sat slightly toward the entrance, so the smoke could escape cleanly through an opening at the top. That opening had two flaps, called ears, which could be adjusted to control the draft and to keep out rain and snow. The floor was covered with hides and dry grass, sealing out the frozen ground. Beds lined the walls, raised on furs, and people slept with their feet toward the fire, so the warmth spread evenly through the body. Even the doorway was deliberate. It faced east, away from the brutal western winds, low and narrow, to lose as little heat as possible. So step inside during a blizzard, and something strange happens. The roar of the wind suddenly falls to a whisper. The tepee was never just a tent. It was a complete climate system, warm, ventilated, windproof, and able to be packed up and carried anywhere. But what about those who could never move? Those who had to face 30 winters in a single place. In the dense forests of the Northeast, where winters dropped to 30 below, the peoples of the Iroquois Confederacy built something completely different. Not a tent, not a temporary shelter, but a monumental wooden home, standing in one place for decades, the Longhouse. These structures stretched from 20 to 60 meters long. Their frames were built from young elm trunks, bent into great arches to form a tunnel-shaped roof, strong enough to carry the heaviest snow. Over this frame, large sheets of elm and ash bark were layered like tiles, sealing out wind and water. But the real warmth of the Longhouse came from something you would never expect. People. Up to 100 people from 20 related families could live inside a single Longhouse. And the heat from their bodies, simply by breathing and moving, became a constant, fuel-free source of warmth. Think about that. Each human body gives off about 100 watts of heat. 100 people produce 10,000 watts, around the clock, with no fuel at all. The Longhouse was, in a very real sense, a living organism that warmed itself from within. Along the central aisle, a row of open hearths burned, spaced evenly so warmth reached every corner with no cold spots. Each family had its own section, about 3 meters wide, divided into 2 levels. The ground level was for working and cooking by day. The raised platform above was for sleeping. And those sleeping platforms reveal a beautiful understanding of physics. Cold air sinks, warm air rises. By sleeping high above the floor, families slept in the warmest air in the house, gently heated by the rising warmth of the fires below. The walls were layered too, bark on the outside to block wind and water, woven mats on the inside to hold the heat, and the air between them insulating like a thermos. Even the food supplies played a role. Tons of corn, beans, and dried meat were stored inside, and all that mass absorbed and stabilized the temperature, softening the swing between day and night. The supplies were not just food, they were insulation. And here is something our modern world has almost forgotten. In the Longhouse, survival was never every man for himself. Warmth was something you shared, breath by breath, body beside body. The home was warmed by the fire and by each other. Yet, even the warmest home was useless without one thing, and finding it on a treeless plain seemed impossible. On the vast Great Plains, there were no forests. In many places, not a single tree for miles. Firewood, the most basic fuel on Earth, simply did not exist. So the people of the plains found another source, and it was, quite literally, beneath their feet. Dried bison dung. They called it, in effect, dry gold. The great herds, numbering in the millions, left endless amounts of it across the grasslands. Gathered and dried in the sun and wind, it became a dense, fibrous fuel made almost entirely of digested grass. And it burned beautifully. slowly, evenly, giving off strong, steady heat. But here is the surprising part. It produced almost no smoke. That mattered more than you might think. Thick smoke inside a teepee would be unbearable. But more than that, a smokeless fire was nearly invisible from a distance. An entire camp could burn dozens of fires and vanish into the landscape, an advantage in the hunt and in times of danger. Witnesses said the smell was not unpleasant at all, something like dry grass or peat. For those who grew up on the prairie, it was simply the smell of home. And it reveals something profound about how these people lived. The bison gave them everything: food, clothing, shelter, and now fire. Nothing was wasted. They saw value where others would see only waste. But the most shocking insulator of all was the very thing trying to kill them: the snow itself. To most people, snow is the enemy, the symbol of cold, of death, of everything to be feared in winter. But the indigenous peoples of the North saw it differently. To them, snow was not a problem. Snow was a solution. Before the deep frost arrived, they would bank the base of their homes, piling earth, turf, and heavy stones around the lower walls. This thick layer sealed every crack near the ground, blocked the piercing wind, and stopped the frozen soil from stealing heat from below. The floor inside stayed warmer, and you could feel it under bare feet. Then the snow came, and the system grew stronger on its own. Because here is the truth that sounds impossible. Fresh, loose snow is one of the best natural insulators on Earth. Up to 90% of its volume is nothing but trapped air. Snow is, in effect, a foam made by winter to defend against winter. So they used it on purpose. They shoveled snow high against the walls, building drifts that could rise a meter or more, almost to the roof. This snow wall blocked the wind completely and sealed the gaps where the hide cover never quite met the uneven ground. In the far north, some went further still. They dug their homes partly into the earth, then covered them with thick layers of soil and snow. Outside, the temperature could be 30 below. Inside, it hovered near zero, a difference of 30 degrees created by nothing but earth and snow. Even the entrance was planned around the snow. A long tunnel was built before winter, and when the snow buried it, it became a natural airlock. The cold air got trapped inside the tunnel, unable to reach the people within. So the very thing that Europeans cursed as death, the people of the North welcomed as a blanket. Knowledge turned an enemy into a friend. And yet, the warmest place in any home was not near the fire at all. The genius of these homes was not only in their shells, it was in how every inch inside was arranged to hold warmth. The fire was rarely in the exact center. By shifting it toward the entrance or along a central line, the smoke could rise cleanly and fresh air could reach the flame without sending drafts through the living space. Around the fire, they placed stones. By day, the stones soaked up the heat. By night, when the flames died down, they slowly released it back. A simple heat battery, smoothing the temperature through the darkest hours. The space was divided by warmth. The coldest area along the outer walls held supplies and belongings, which became an extra buffer against the cold. And the beds were always raised off the ground, even just 20 or 30 centimeters, to lift the sleeper above the coldest layer of air that pools across the floor. The bed itself was a work of quiet science. First, a thick layer of spruce branches or dry grass, creating a cushion of trapped air. Then, heavy hides, like bear or bison, fur facing up. Then, softer skins to sleep on. And finally, the warmest furs of all as blankets, light as breath, yet astonishingly warm. And the simplest method was also the most powerful. They slept together. Family members lay close, sharing the heat of their bodies, each one warming the others. Feet toward the fire, bodies toward each other. There was even more. Smooth river stones, heated in the fire, then wrapped in leather and tucked into the bed. They gave off warmth for hours, turning a cold sleeping place into a cozy nest. The same stones warmed frozen clothing in the morning and could be held in mittens to save fingers from frostbite on long, motionless hunts. Picture it, the wind howling outside, the fire glowing low, a family wrapped in fur, warm stones at their feet, breathing slowly in the dark, safe inside a cocoon they built with their own hands. It is a kind of warmth our modern world has almost forgotten, the warmth of belonging. But none of this would matter without the final ingredient, one that lived inside the body itself. The greatest source of heat was never the fire. It was the human body. And to keep that inner furnace burning, they ate with purpose. Winter food was rich in fat and protein, the most concentrated fuel the body can use. Fatty meat, bone marrow, and nuts filled the winter table because fat releases enormous energy as the body breaks it down. And the most famous of all was pemmican. Pemmican was made from dried, pounded bison meat, mixed with melted fat and sometimes dried berries. It was light, it was compact, it could be stored for years. And it delivered a tremendous burst of energy to fight the cold. In a very real way, it was the world's first energy bar, the original survival superfood. Hot food and warm drinks mattered too. A bowl of broth or herbal tea warmed the body from the inside and kept it hydrated. Because in winter, dehydration creeps in quietly, just as dangerous as it is in summer. Every calorie was counted, every bit of warmth captured and used. The body was a furnace, and they knew exactly how to feed it. But the deepest secret of all was not in the body or the home or the fire. It was in the mind. Survival in such a place was never only about materials and engineering. It was about how they chose to see the world. They did not view winter as an enemy to be defeated. To them, it was a natural part of the year. A season with its own hardships, yes, but also its own gifts. Winter was a time of rest. After the long labor of summer, the dark evenings became a time for stories, for repairing tools, for ceremony, for being together. The hardest season became the most human one, and the community moved as one body. If a family ran out of food, others shared their own, cooking, raising children, preparing hides, all of it done side by side. No one faced the winter alone. And that knowledge, that you were never alone, gave a strength that no fire could provide. This wisdom was passed down through generations. How to read the sky before a storm, how to find your way through a blizzard, how to use every resource without waste. It was the most precious inheritance of all, because it kept an entire people alive. And underneath it all was respect. They took from nature only what they needed and gave thanks for it. They never drained the world they depended on. Think about what that means for us today. In a world obsessed with conquering nature, with bigger machines and more power and endless consumption, these people had already learned something we are still struggling to remember. They had learned how to belong to the world instead of fighting it. So let us return to where we began. That small fire burning through the deadliest night, the family sleeping peacefully, the wind screaming at 40 below. Now you understand why that fire did not die. Because it was never alone. That single flame stood at the center of an entire system, a shell shaped to defeat the wind, walls layered with trapped air, snow piled high as a blanket of insulation, fur and hide holding every degree of warmth, stones storing heat through the night, bodies lying close, sharing the warmth of life itself. The fire survived because it was held by everything around it, by the home, by the snow, by the knowledge passed down through 1,000 winters, and above all, by people together. That was the real secret. Not a single invention, but a way of living in harmony with a world that could kill, and choosing instead to understand it. Their story is more than history. It is a reminder that the cleverest solutions are often the simplest, that nature is not always an enemy, and that warmth, in the end, is something we share. So, here is a question for you. Of all these ancient secrets, which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to know how other peoples survive the impossible, stay close, because next time we travel north into a land where winter lasts half the year to discover how the Vikings survived the dark. Until then, stay warm and stay curious.